The year is 1999. A first grader has just gotten back from the library after hearing a new film was coming out in a series he'd never really heard of. He pops in the VHS and is met with darkness. A soft blue glow envelops around him as that transcending title dissolves on screen. A long time ago, in a galaxy far, far away. Holy shit, I love Star Wars! Holy shit, I love Star Wars! In fact, you know what? That's what this entire series is subtitled. Swahili Reviews Star Wars Special. Holy shit, I love Star Wars! Holy shit! One of sci-fi's greatest movie additions, and overall one of the general greatest movie series of all time. It's a story of daring heroes, evil empires, love, and spirituality. It's an epic quest that spreads our depths of imagination as one of the greatest modern examples of the monomythical archetype that it's a hero's journey. It's a pop cultural icon spanning generations of fans, young and old alike. And it's a series of films that have been so dearly loved and debated that it's really hard to say anything absolutely new about them. So I'm gonna try to do that. I'm gonna get killed! Doug Walker, when talking about his Nostalgia Critic reviews, says it best about why it's kinda silly to review the prequels.
Everybody's done it. Everybody has pointed out every single solitary little thing wrong with that movie.
And before anyone says anything, yes, I am fully aware of RedLetterMedia's wonderful series of 70-minute reviews in the prequel trilogy. I, in many ways, am inspired by their work of deep analytical discussion and somewhat overly crude humor, and to, for even one moment, attempt to copy or emulate that review style would be absolutely absurd, okay? So, no. What this series is going to try and accomplish is a giant retrospective of the entire Star Wars saga as a whole, before Star Wars Episode 7 is released. So, I have it planned out for the next 6 months, aside from, any of the other reviews I do, which I will be doing. We'll be taking a long study on one of the most beloved franchises of American film history, and leading up to one of the most anticipated sequels of this generation. The idea is to take an intellectual stock of everything that's happened so far, so that at the end of the next 6 months, even if you've never seen Star Wars at all, you're going to be prepared to see Episode 7 when it comes out in theaters in December, okay? That's the idea. That's what we're trying to give back to the community. Number 1, why start at Episode 1? So, first I gotta address my reasoning behind doing Star Wars in its sequential order instead of, chronological. Old Georgie decided to hop in his DeLorean and take his stories back in time when, after the release of Empire, he decided to start each film with the prefix of episode. So, why start here? Well, for one, I want to get these episodes out of the way right the fuck now. The prequel trilogy is considered one of the most disappointing things in pop culture cinema. People, of course, say that's hyperbole. To them, I say, you don't even know. You don't understand how easy it was to make new Star Wars movies. You don't know how bad they fucked up. Now, I don't think that the prequels ruined my childhood. That's hyperbole, but they are still pretty terrible films, like just generally. Secondly, we're not doing this from a cinematic perspective, but rather an analytical one. That means we have to conclude all plot points as they occur within the universe, not within our own. I want to be completely and truthfully clear as we go through these films, one by one, adding on to the story as each one progresses. Number 2, the plot. Episode 1 starts with a bang! Or at least it starts with some really boring political dialogue and an introduction to our boring characters, and then finally we get to the bang! And I hope you didn't get too attached to those pilot characters because their deaths are never avenged or brought up again. Qui-Gon Jinn and Obi-Wan learned that the Trade Federation, whom they were originally there to do peace treaty negotiations with due to a planet-scale blockade, turns out to actually be separatist rebels who are itching to start a conflict with the Galactic Republic. Unbeknownst to the Jedi, but knownst to us, that the powerful Sith Lords are behind the whole thing. Qui-Gon and Obi-Wan make their way down to the planet that the Federation has been blockading, and it's called Naboo, and from there they meet a Gungan named Jar Jar, a queen and her staff, and a droid or 2 or 3. After escaping the blockade to bring the queen to the Galactic Senate so she can try to help the whole situation, they realize that they don't have a hyperdrive powerful enough to get there. They decide instead to first stop at the nearby planet and acquire a new hyperdrive. That happens to be Tatooine, so there they meet Anakin Skywalker and his mom. And through some of the most convoluted bullshit ever spewed onto a cinema screen, they managed to win the hyperdrive they needed to make their way into the Senate. And it turns out that Anakin is a Jedi, and could potentially be the prophesized chosen one, so he gets to tag along for the rest of the movie and hopes he'll learn Jedi stuff by picking up on it. After some more boring as fuck political shit, they've convinced the Senate and must now return to Naboo to retake the capital from the Federation's occupation. Finally, they do battle with the droid army, retake the city, blow up a control ship, and manage to fight the evil Sith all in one final act of the film. And once it's over, believe me, you are glad it's over. The major flaws of the plot have been established so many times on the internet, it's not even funny anymore. But just in case you haven't seen any other review, I'll give you the Cliff's Notes version of why this majorly doesn't work. First, it's a bore to sit through. The film is 2 hours when it could have very easily been a good 90 minutes. There's at least a half an hour worth of shit that could have been trimmed. Second, the convolutedness in itself of the plot is only made more so when you sit through the shitty dialogue that makes little sense and is acted very poorly, especially given that the actual cast of actors we had to work with. Everyone is stilted and wooden, and the whole film, and it just really drags what was already a long movie into something abysmal. Number 3. Dissecting Episode 1. So honestly, I think I figured out the whole idea behind what George was trying to do when it came to the prequels. And while the concept is fairly shaky considering what I'm basing it on, I do think that when you start to look at it through this lens, you'll start to see things a little more clearly. Okay, you ready? The prequel trilogy was George's attempt at a film noir. Not a good one, but film noir nonetheless. Now hear me out. We all know that Star Wars was originally an homage to the 50s and 40s B sci-fi, like Flash Gordon serials. And on top of that, we know that his most other famous work, Indiana Jones, was his take on adventure serials in the 40s. But look even closer. Howard the Duck was his attempt at making a comic book movie, a sort of pulp magazine version of the films he grew up with in the 40s and the 50s. And on top of that, his newest film, Red Tails, is a hyper-stylized war-era propaganda-type film, much like the kind of movie you would have expected Ronald Reagan to have starred in back in his acting days. With all that being said, what other famous genre from the 40s and 50s hasn't George tackled yet? Film and crime noir. Think about it. With all the crime and legal jargon, it's almost like Episode 1 could have aired as a mini-series on NBC.
In a galaxy far, far away, the people are represented by 2 separate yet equally important groups. The Jedi, who investigate crime, and the Galactic Senate, who prosecute the offenders. These are their stories.
The rise of Anakin Skywalker turning into Darth Vader can be looked at, plot-wise, as a very noir-type structure. It's dark, it's foreboding, and it's a tragic tale of human suffering that we know right off the bat isn't going to end well for our favorite characters. But it gets deeper than that. TV Tropes lists a quote, "You need cops, Venetian blinds, lots of smoking hats, sweat, dead-end streets, guys who know all the angles except for the one that ends up sticking out of their backs, sirens of the automotive and female kind when talking about film noir." The Star Wars prequels has practically all of that, sans a few, and with others having a sci-fi substitute. The whole plot of the movie is to spark a mystery plot as to the doings and goings-ons of the Sith.
Go with the Queen to Naboo and discover the identity of this dark warrior.
Right away, we're treated with a murder and another attempted murder of our heroes. If you look at the Jedi as Lucas makes them in the prequels as sort of a space detective, you realize that they're perfectly fitting of the sort of buddy cop trope. Qui-Gon is the wise sage cop who's been on the Force for years and is inches away from retirement. Obi-Wan is his up-and-coming rookie partner who's hot-headed and quick to be smarmy. Padme is the femme fatale in a sense that she shows up to their office, or in this case, them showing up to her planet, with a problem that needs solving, and they have to battle a corrupt system and an endearing suspect as they try to piece together the mystery. In the end, Qui-Gon gets stabbed in a fight, passing the torch of tormented emotional soul to Obi-Wan. Lucas was trying to create an atmosphere of pulpy detective novel in his dark and foreboding tale of the fall to the dark side, but he fell flat in that he wasted all of that by trying to ham-fist it into Star Wars movies. Star Wars was almost a traditional Western in space, borrowing from both Eastern and Western ideas. The prequels become too much about plot and not enough about characters. What's more is that he ruined the mysticisms of Star Wars through two ways. One, he added those god-awful midichlorians, which was a way to try and explain scientifically how the Force works in this universe.
I need an analysis of this blood sample I'm sending you.
Wait a minute.
I need a midichlorian count.
The reading is off the chart. Over 20,000.
Even Master Yoda doesn't have a midichlorian count that high.
No Jedi has.
This shatters the grand illusion the Force once had for us, and instead making it a thing that can be touched, felt, and worse, tested.
Luminous beings, Zoe, not this crude matter.
Midichlorian count.
The reading is off the chart.
2, he introduces real-world religion into the fray by being completely unsubtle in his inclusion of Anakin's supposed virgin birth.
Who was his father?
There was no father. I carried him, I gave birth, I raised him. I can't explain what happened.
The will of the Force is what birthed him? I mean, come on! We get he's supposed to be like Space Jesus now, but couldn't the whole prophecy thing have spoken for itself? Do we really need the whole his father was basically God nonsense? There's no thought being put into this. The criticism that's always used is that George wrote this movie in like 1 or 2 drafts and never had anyone question his decisions, and frankly it shows. This whole movie is sloppy. From the way these kids enter and exit a scene by playing the exact same sound effect, to the way that Typho mispronounces Alderaan.
Bail Antilles of Alderaan.
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 If you wanted to write a murder mystery, George, fine. Go ahead and write one, but don't try to shove it into a Star Wars movie. It's just not going to work for you. Number 4, the recap so far. So what do we know now that we didn't know before, and what do we need to know as we move on to the next film? Well, the problem with the prequels is that they are part of a pre-established work. Some of the stuff mentioned is only mentioned in brief, assuming you've seen the previous 3 films, so I'll try to boil down just the most important factors from the film the best I can for our first recap. They are as follows. Obi-Wan Kenobi had a master named Qui-Gon Jinn who was near and dear to him. Just before finishing their mission together, Qui-Gon is killed by a Sith Lord who Obi-Wan then also kills. He is now tortured by that loss. Anakin Skywalker is a small, soon-to-be Jedi with great power and potential to bring balance to the Force. Obi-Wan swore he would mentor the young boy and teach him the ways of the Force. The Trade Federation, who are separatists with their droid army, are secretly being backed by the Sith. It's very heavily implied at the end of the film that the newly elected Chancellor of the Republic, Palpatine, is actually the evil Dark Lord.
A master and an apprentice.
But which was destroyed? The master or the apprentice?
Number 5. The end. Okay, yeah, this is probably my shortest review so far, but you gotta understand that there really isn't much new to be said about the prequel trilogy, and that the meat of my reviews are really gonna pick up with episode 4. So if you're not really interested until then, stick around until October, and then we're really gonna start getting into territory that I don't think people have dared to go before. Until then, I highly recommend you check out Red Letter Media's review of the prequel trilogy, if you haven't already. Pretty great stuff. There's some exceptionally raunchier humor that might not be suitable for everyone, and I don't excuse that, but as for the true intentions of the review, they're spot on. But, viewer be warned when going, but I'll link to them in the description. Otherwise, I hope you enjoyed the first edition of the Star Wars special. Here's to 6 more months of speculation until we get to see Episode 7 for the first time. Oh boy!